Ever played FNAF and went, hey, that's not really scary anymore? Today I have 5 FNAF fan games, with each game getting less and less scarier, until we reach the least scariest game I could find. So let's get straight into these absolutely obscure and just insane FNAF games. Enjoy. This first game is called Tearlerland. We start this game with a short cutscene. Us, the protagonist, David Artel, and our brother Till have kind of drifted apart in the past few years, mainly due to the closure of the amusement park called Tearlerland, which we founded. The reasoning for the closure wasn't fully disclosed, and that pretty much brings us up to date with the game's story. However, we get a message from someone that we know, and this message brings us back to Tearlerland. As we arrive here, we see the amusement park abandoned and lifeless. During this little walk around the park, we kind of nearly come to contact with one of the animatronics. However, we slightly brush it off and we continue our descent into the amusement park. This latter section is the first section of the game. It's pretty simple. You need to get all the way down the ladder, and during this time, an animatronic will try and attack you. If we see the animatronic, which is Tiller, we need to use our flashlight on him. This section was overall pretty easy to complete. There were some stages where I was going down pretty fast, trying to get this done as quickly as possible, but eventually I would get fully down and complete this first little section. Now we have access to the facility itself, and this starts the events of the night sections, during which we are in a boarded off room inside of Tearlerland. In this room, there's 3 different compartments, the second area being the hallway and the last area being the supply closet. Each area has different things we need to do, but first of all, we need to repair our droid, or the assembly machine. This machine acts as a lure, and we need to use this lure to, well, you would have never guessed, lure the animatronics. During each night, we need to find 3 different parts to build the machine, and these parts can be found scattered throughout the 3 different areas of the game. 2 of which are the areas they can spawn, being the hallway and the assembly room. Once you grab all 3 parts and you repair the lure machine, it will activate and it will start going toward the inner areas of the amusement park. I actually did the tutorial, which meant that this first night was kind of me getting used to the game's mechanics, which was pretty useful because I can't lie, if I didn't do this, I would have had no idea how to complete the night. Going back to the main room, we can now access a terminal, which gives us a display of our lure machine. The machine can roam around the rooms of the building, and we need to now find where the other animatronics are, and when we find them, we need to go up close to try and lure them with the machine. There are ways which can actually make it so the animatronics won't be lured. First of all, if we remain still, the animatronics won't be fooled, so we need to make sure we are moving left to right often to make sure the animatronics are fooled. Once we get the meter bar up all the way, the animatronic is now lured by the, well, machine we have. We need to now get them to a boarded off room, so once we get the animatronic affected by our lure, we need to go toward that room and enter it, and this will make sure the animatronic remains in that room. If we are not fast enough and the lure timer runs out, the animatronic will be freed and continue to roam around the building. The first night, I would eventually have an error with my lure machine. This is due to me being around the animatronics for too long, which meant I got an error. We now have to go toward the assembly room and fix the file which has been corrupted. However, due to my first time playing, I had no idea what to do, and this led to a game over. What I needed to do is click on the Exani file, which would repair my lure, but me not doing this led to my ultimate demise. My second attempt went a little better. I managed to grab the animatronic and lure them to the boarded off room. By going to my checklist and ticking the containment, we can leave and go straight into the second night, or the second hour as the game calls it. This night we have another animatronic to deal with, but I actually forgot an animatronic in the first night. The animatronic which I forgot to mention is Willow. How Willow works is eventually Willow will get toward your hallway, and when this happens you have to go toward the hallway and stare at the animatronic. And if Willow is in the hallway for too long without being looked at, he will jump scare you. So moving into the second hour, we now have a new animatronic, this being Frill. Frill is kind of like Tiller. We need to get these 2 toward the containment rooms. With Frill, however, he can actually attack us unlike Tiller. How this can happen is if Frill gets toward our door, he will make a sound, and at this point, we need to go toward the door and stare at him. We need to stare at Frill through the keyhole, and doing this, we will get rid of the threat. This hour was kind of like hour 1. However, with the new threat, the overall game was significantly harder. Hour 2 was extremely simple. I lured the 2 animatronics pretty quickly, and doing this, I completed the night pretty fast. Moving on to hour 3, we now have a new animatronic to deal with, this being Tacy. How Tacy works is she is also a lure-able threat. She is pretty much like Frill, however, she, instead of being super loud, is extremely quiet. So this also means that we need to go toward the door and look through the keyhole. So for night 3, we now have a total of 3 lure threats. This means that the nights themselves are going to be a lot longer. However, my main goal with this game was to get through the nights as quickly as possible. As with the lure, we were able to really get through the animatronics extremely quickly if I was of course lucky and they wouldn't go straight to my office. I also had a power outage for the first time. How to deal with power outages is it's actually pretty simple. To deal with this problem on your terminal, look for a jerry can. With this item, you're going to need to make your way toward this like control panel thing, and once you do that, the power will restore in the building. The power outage is overall pretty easy to counter, but the problem is you may end up going near the animatronics, which may cause you to get hacked. And going to the storage room is pretty risky in these later nights as you never know what's going to be in the hallway. We got through this power outage pretty nicely, and overall the mechanics of the game were starting to become a lot more easier for me. The way I would beat this night is by just simply getting lucky. For some reason at random points the animatronics just stand still. This is the perfect time to get them lured as this is the moment that they won't be aggressive toward you the player. So I had this to happen to all 3 animatronics, which allowed me to get them into their respected rooms, and this would conclude hour 3 with a pretty nice little dialogue, and we'd move into hour 4, which was pretty difficult. This hour introduces the animatronic Mischievous. How this animatronic works is pretty simple. If you hear like a music box kind of sound start to play, he will be in the hallway. At this point, you cannot go into the hallway until this music box stops playing. If you go into the hallway, you're gonna get jump scared. The issue is sometimes you may not be able to hear the music box, as the sound is pretty low, which means that if you go in the hallway, there's always a chance he may be in there. So the nights now became a little bit more intense, as if I got, you know, my lure becoming hacked, I won't be able to know if the storage room is safe to actually get to and get back into the main room. So this night would take me a lot of attempts. To find where Mischievous is, going on the terminal, we can see the 2 animatronics that go toward the office. If I see the clown-like animatronic get near it, I just wouldn't go through the hallway, just focusing on getting to the lure-able threats. During this time when the clown is in the hallway, it was a perfect opportunity to start going for the animatronics that I need to lure. This is because during this time you actually don't need to be in the hallway to remove the animatronic threat, meaning that I can just focus on the terminal and get the animatronics into their respective rooms. And as soon as you knew it, I eventually was able to beat this night, but it did take me a couple of attempts. And I mean, it nearly took me over an hour to beat, but that meant we would now be able to beat the 5th hour of the game. This hour would introduce a new animatronic, the doll. How the doll works is when Mischievous goes toward the hallway, he will most likely send out the doll. The doll can be found either in the control room or the supplies closet. If you suspect this does happen, go toward one of these 2 rooms and you may see it lying on the floor. You can also hear the doll get louder the closer you get toward the doll. And if you get jump scared by the doll, well, you're gonna start bleeding, and if you don't heal, then you're going to die no matter what. So you need to make sure that this threat is taken care of. This night was actually pretty tough. It would take me a couple of attempts, but I got an attempt where I was extremely lucky. All the 3 animatronics again stood still, which meant I had the perfect opportunity to take them toward their rooms. And well, what do you know? I took them to their rooms and was able to complete the night in under like 20-30 seconds. So really lucky. This meant I was able to beat this hour and complete the game. That is if a finale section didn't exist, which it does. In this section, the most unlikely of events take place. The lure machine we've been relying on the whole game has finally turned on us. This was planned by Till all this time, to trap us and lure us into the mines of Tearlerland. Now we are the most vulnerable we've ever been. We are facing down all the animatronics in one. However, there still is a chance of us surviving. What we need to do is we need to make sure this creature, also called the deterrent, is pretty much deactivated. There are 4 generators located throughout the building, and our goal is to trap the deterrent inside these generators. The deterrent is pretty menacing, however it is extremely stupid. Being that the machine was designed to lure things, it also can lure itself. What I mean by this is if you open a door, the lure machine will go toward that door as it's part of its programming. We need to make sure that the generator is already near 100% completed. So we need to already pre-charge the generator before the deterrent even gets inside the room. To add on top of this, the deterrent will eventually make his way toward the player. At this point, we need to do one of 2 things. Either the deterrent will be to our right or our left, and whichever area it is in, we need to simply flash it with our flashlight. Pretty easy way to deal with it, but nonetheless, the whole night relies on getting these generators completed. Once a generator is fully fueled, it will explode, causing the deterrent to become weakened. This was overall a pretty interesting section. It wasn't insanely tough as you would expect, but it was tense enough to make a pretty nice and grand finale. Eventually, I would complete the last generator, making the deterrent no longer a threat. This would pretty much end the events of Tearlerland. At this point, we somehow escape the facility, but our brother Till is very angry. He promises that he will come for us no matter the cost, which means that there's probably gonna be a sequel to this game. Overall, Tearlerland is an absolutely fantastic FNAF fan game. But with that, let's move into a slightly less scarier FNAF game. Let's move into Fredbear and Friends Left to Rot for our next game in the video. This game starts with a pretty awesome cutscene with Fredbear. We have to get rid of Fredbear's parts, and this reveals his endoskeleton. By putting on the new and improved animatronic suits, we get to see a kind of revamp of the animatronic suits, which we see later on in FNAF 2. This then cuts, and we then go straight into our first night of the game. We get a pretty clear description on what we need to do. We need to first go inside, disable the video and audio systems, and then from there make our way toward the storage rooms. Getting into this first night, we need to now do multiple things. We have a camera system which gives us access to 8 cameras, and within these camera systems we have an audio and a video display. The other parts of the room involve a flashlight, and looking to our right we have a hallway where we can crouch to avoid detection from animatronics. The whole point of this section is to disable our video and audio displays. How we can do this is by selecting them on our camera. We wait a few seconds and then they will disappear. This whole night relies on a FNAF 1-esque gameplay loop by tracking animatronics throughout the camera system. But the catch is, the more you disable, the less you can actually observe. For this first night we have Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. We also have an unknown endoskeleton animatronic who is a little different from the other ones, so let's explain how he works. How this animatronic works is he will be on camera 3 exclusively. If we go to camera 3, there's a chance he can appear. If this animatronic appears, we need to stare at him until he leaves. So what I did is to make sure I got rid of this animatronic, I left camera 3 to the last available camera to get rid of. This meant I could successfully get through every single camera and make sure that I don't risk dying by not, seeing this animatronic. A few times some animatronics popped up near my office, so by sneaking or by crouching, I was able to avoid their detection. So pretty cool gameplay loop, and this eventually led me to complete the room. We then cut to another cutscene of the Freddy Fazbear mascot. During this cutscene we have a control panel where if we select different buttons we can make Freddy do different things. We can make him move his jaw, we can make him laugh, and we can make him move forward. Pretty creepy stuff. This leads straight into the next night, which is the storage room night. Here we have one animatronic only to deal with, and this is the clown animatronic. How we deal with this guy is we need to make sure that we go toward his stage and press the shock button. The tough part is we also need to get a door to open. This door opens by holding the button, and the door will slowly begin to open. However, if you deselect this button, the door charge percentage will go down really fast. So it means if you do see the clown animatronic, also known as Max, you need to go right to left pretty quickly to deal with the animatronic. The night has no time limit, so you can pretty much spend as much time as possible, but that's kind of a bad thing because if you're not careful, you could be here for a while. But by making some risky plays, we got the percentage up pretty high. Keeping track of max wasn't really too difficult, and eventually we beat this night and moved into our next room. The next night intermission section houses a few arcade games. The first game being Golden Comet, which is a kind of arcadey shooter game, which just is pretty cool. And the next game, which is a more broken, just decrepit game, which kind of alludes to some lore happening in the game, but nonetheless, we eventually beat this and the game freezes, crashes, and we move into our next room. This room, we have two animatronics. The first one being Nightmare Musiki, that's an absolutely Chad name, and the other one which is the Winding Toy. The night is again pretty simple like night 2. We need to get the vent behind us to open, and we need to slowly make it open as we deal with animatronic threats. We need to turn around, and this will house the first animatronic, which is the Winding Toy. To deal with this animatronic, you just have to hold it and it will begin to wind, making him not a threat. And the other one, Nightmare Musiki, he will either come from straight in front of you, trying to attack you, or your right, where he will go through a door. If you see Musiki, you need to use the Hyper Flash, which will scare him away. This night is pretty simple, just keep getting that vent to open and dealing with these two animatronics. Eventually, we would beat this room and go straight into another cool midnight section. And by pressing it, we hear some audio of the Springlock suits. The audio itself is exactly like Phone Guy in FNAF 3, and we are told how these suits work and what to look out for. After which, we get straight into one of these highly dangerous suits, and if you can imagine, it's FNAF, we get spring locked. Well, I think we do. It looks like we do. The next night actually has a more FNAF-esque kind of situation. We are in the test room 2, and here we have all the rotten animatronics to deal with. The whole room itself is completely toxic, so we have to have a gas mask to accompany us throughout the night. The night itself is pretty simple. We have 4 animatronics to deal with, and those being Rotten Freddy, Rotten Bonnie, Rotten Foxy, and Rotten Chica. Rotten Freddy and Rotten Chica work pretty much the same. Both animatronics will eventually make their way toward the vent. Once they get into the vent, we're going to need to disable the ventilation. This will cause the animatronic to leave. However, for us, the player, we need to make sure that we immediately restore ventilation, as during this brief period of time, the toxicity will spike tremendously, meaning that if we're not careful, we could pretty much die. For Rotten Bonnie, to get rid of him, when he occasionally sneaks up behind you, you can see him through this piece of glass. If Rotten Bonnie does get to this position, you need to wait until he gets his hand and starts reaching for you. When he does this, you need to use the fan to our left, and this will get rid of Rotten Bonnie. And for Rotten Foxy, if you see him in the hallway, you're going to need to press this button, which will disable power throughout the building, which means Foxy cannot see us and we can get rid of all threats. This night did take me a couple of attempts, but eventually I would get the hang of things and start to build kind of a routine throughout the night. And this would allow me to get gradually closer and closer to finishing the night off. For the last 2 minutes of the night, the animatronics difficulty, or their AIs, became a lot more aggressive, which meant I really had to pay attention to all the animatronics movesets, especially Bonnie, who seemed to kill me most if I wasn't really paying attention. Eventually, I would beat the night and we would move into the final room of the game. Before this, we are put in a room with a Golden Freddy suit right in front of us. We grab a can of spray and start highlighting the suit with the spray, and this leads to the final room of the game. It seems to be on the top floor, and here we have 4 more animatronics to take care of. The animatronics in question are Suit, Security Freddy, Security Bonnie, and Security Fredbear. We'll start with the most important animatronic, which is Suit. How Suit works is he will spawn in the backstage of the pizzeria. When we see Suit, he will have his eyes mostly on. However, when his eyes deactivate, this is the perfect time to take him into the return state. This will allow him to move from one area of the pizzeria to another, which is what we need because we need Suit to get toward the office, and this will conclude the night. Moving on, we have Security Freddy, who is pretty much just Michael Myers. He will occasionally pop up in front of your office, and if he does do this, he will have a knife in his hand. If this does happen, there's a piece of paper on the glass, and you need to move this on his eyes to block his view. If you do this correctly, he should leave without jump scaring you. And next is Security Bonnie, who is pretty simple and is by far the easiest to deal with. Security Bonnie will occasionally pop up on your right, and if this does happen, you have to use the cables you have provided to you, and holding these cables you can shock Security Bonnie, which will make him go away. And lastly, Security Fredbear. How he works is occasionally on your cameras you can see him pop up. If you don't go off the camera fast enough, he will disable all the cameras for a certain period of time. Now that we have all the animatronics out of the way, it's time to actually beat the night. When I first started this night, I was pretty confused on what to actually do. But the night is really simple, like stupidly simple. In the control panel, you have the return button and the locate button. All you need to do is press the locate button to find Suit, and then press the return button when Suit's eyes aren't activated. This will move him to one of many rooms, but we need to get Suit to the office, so we need to move him toward that direction. We can't really decide which area he will move to, but if we just keep moving him, eventually he will wind up somewhere in the left or right hallway. And if we get him toward this hallway, if we do the return again, he will get toward our office, completing the night. There were some instances where animatronics were bombarding my office, but there were only 2 of them, and to be honest, they're very easy to get rid of. Eventually, I would get Suit closer and closer toward my office, and eventually we would get him inside the office, completing the events of Fredbear and Friends Left to Rot. You know me, I would of course grab myself the tragic ending. I don't really know what that means, but I'm assuming it's not good. And with that, we would now be able to access the extras menu, giving us access to all 13 animatronics in the game. We would get some really cool insight into the development of the game, getting some cool look at the cut content or stuff that wasn't in the game when it was finished. And with that, let's move into our next game. So let's move on to Five Nights at Wario's. This is pretty much Mario but mixed with FNAF, and it's pretty interesting, so let's get into it. We start this game with a cutscene with Wario and Waluigi, and they seem to be in a bunker. The whole story of this game is Wario and Waluigi are kind of operating in their factory. They own a fast food factory. The whole thing becomes a mystery as the two end up disappearing for an unknown reason. And it is our job now to take control of the factory and, well, do the night shift. There's a lot of surprising lore in this game that we end up discovering, but we're going to stick to the gameplay as I think this is the most important part of the game. So just like normal FNAF, we have 2 doors left to right and a light switch for each door. Well, I should say door and a window. We also have a camera system which gives us access to the whole facility's camera system. How this game works is for the first night we have 2 threats. These threats are Waluigi and Wario, the 2 that were missing before. They have this really eerie look to them and they seem to be possessed by something as shown by their white eyes, but nonetheless, the factory seems to be abandoned. In the camera system, the rooms seem to be connected. This is intentional, as the animatronics will move from room to room until they reach your office. If you suspect that they are at the office, you need to press the light switch, and if the character is there, you need to close the door by using the red switch. It's just like FNAF 1, but the nights themselves seem to be a little bit longer, and we also get 200% power as opposed to 100. However, the power does go down really fast if you start using a lot of lights and doors, so you have to use these 2 tools very sparingly. This first night is pretty much just cat and mouse with Wario and Waluigi. Occasionally they may pop up at your door, and if this does happen, you're going to need to close it for like 10 seconds. This night went by pretty quickly, and as soon as I knew it, I was straight into night 2. The new threat for this night is Luigi, and Luigi is by far the most unsettling of the animatronics, and if you look at him when he jump scares you, I mean, the jump scare itself is amazing, but the jump scare itself is straight out of Super Smash Bros. This night is a little bit harder because now we obviously have 3 animatronics to take care of. However, again, the same strat is used to beat this night. If we see the animatronic or the character at our door, we need to close it and do this for the whole remainder of the night. By conserving as much power as possible, we would make it to night 3. And now we have to say hello to Princess Peach. Peach is the most unique animatronic as she will go straight toward the basement. This is a new area of the game compared to the original that was made back in 2015. This underground of the factory houses a bunch of different routes that Peach can get to you. The strat you need to do is you need to wait until Peach moves from the first area of the basement. When she does this, she can end up in one of 3 rooms, and if she does get to that room, you need to flash her with the beam. If you do that, she will go back to her first position, and this will make it so she won't kill you. If you let her get too close to your office, she will open the door, and this will lead to a game over as she will eventually jump scare you. With Peach in the game, it overall became a lot harder now to win because with the animatronics and how often you need to use the power, the cameras themselves become a lot more useful as now we need to really track every single animatronic's movement. As if we don't, we risk using too much light usage, which really drains our power much more than using the camera. By making sure where all the animatronics are and using the doors when necessary, eventually night 3 would be completed and we would move into night 4. This night has the last animatronic, which is Mario. Mario is by far the most unsettling beside Luigi. He will remain in your laptop, kind of like the ring creature. Mario has multiple stages until he reaches your office. Each movement of Mario will get him closer and closer to you until eventually he will be seen in your office. And if this does happen, you need to flip the camera pretty quickly. Basically Golden Freddy from FNAF 2. If you fail to switch the camera, he will jump scare you instantly. Things started to heat up a little bit, and the nights themselves became actually pretty hard. I had to memorize where all the animatronics were, as if I wasn't sure I would risk using power, and again this was pretty much just a game over, as the power goes by pretty fast. By keeping Peach and Mario from going through their stages and making sure I kept the other ones at bay, this night eventually would also be beaten, and we would move into the final night, being night 5. This would be the ultimate test for Five Nights at Wario's. The story of Five Nights at Wario's has been building up each night until this night, where we pretty much hear that the phone guy himself has been, I guess, captured or perhaps even jump scared by Wario and taken captive. And by the end of the phone call, we hear a demonic voice starting to speak to us. So it's pretty much us against the entities. This night really pushed my limits. It was a overall very tough night. I had to really use my power sparingly, as even using a little bit too much could be the end of the whole night. Peach would be by far the most difficult of the animatronics. Keeping her at bay would pretty much keep my whole balance off, as keeping track of Luigi, Waluigi and Wario would already pose enough of a threat. But when you have Peach as well, the whole night just becomes a massive just game of knowing where things are. And with my power draining, eventually the power would run out, and this would lead to a power outage sequence. I haven't really mentioned these yet, but how these work is pretty much Wario goes up to the door, it's pretty much just OG Freddy, and eventually the power would fully cut out. At this point, it was down to the wire, and the seconds were counting. Somehow, I would barely manage to scrape through this night, with Wario being inches away from jump scaring me, and the final cutscene would play for this game, where we see ourselves escaping the factory for the final time, and this would conclude the events of Five Nights at Wario's. We would also see a pretty cool post-credit scene, with Luigi's soul being distorted from his own body, which was pretty terrifying to watch. Next, let's move on to Five Nights at the Chum Bucket, which is a sequel to Five Nights at the Krusty Krabs. This game is a childhood classic for me because I remember very clearly watching 8-Bit Ryan play this like 4 years ago. Anyways, the game starts off and we immediately get introduced to all the game's mechanics. We have 2 doors left to right, a flashlight, and also an overdrive system. The main thing to take away from the first night is the phone call, which states that we are pretty much trapped in the Chum Bucket. This is kind of a survival experiment in that the person in charge wants us kind of dead, and we need to survive for 6 AM. Going into the cameras, we get to see and figure out the layout of the Chum Bucket. The building is devised into 4 clearly distinct floors, and in these floors houses all the animatronics. In this first floor houses Mr. Krabs and Sandy. Moving on to the second floor, we have Squidward. On the third floor, we have Patrick and SpongeBob, and the last floor, which is the generator floor, houses the generator. How this game works is the animatronics will begin in their respective areas. Eventually, they will move into separate floors. They can go from each floor, but the main floor to worry about is your floor, which is BF1. If the animatronics get to this floor and make their way toward your office, you are going to need to do multiple things. If they get toward your door, you need to close that door. So pretty simple. This mechanic goes for multiple animatronics, including SpongeBob and Patrick. The first night we have SpongeBob and Patrick to worry about. So in this first night, we need to keep tab of where these two go. If they get toward the office, we need to shut the door, and repeating this for the whole night, we eventually beat the first night of the game. Moving on to night 2, we now have a new animatronic to keep track of, and this is Squidward. How Squidward works is he begins in his respective floor, and eventually he will make his way toward a vent. If Squidward enters the vent, you're going to need to wait until he is visible on the vent camera. If he is, you need to simply close that vent. There are two vents, the left vent and the right vent. Closing one vent opens the other, so make sure we just kind of figure out where he is and close that vent. With this new mechanic, the overdrive system or the override system is a lot more needed, as now we have 3 different ways animatronics can kill us. Both doors left to right, and also our vent. When I first played the night, I couldn't actually navigate where the camera for the vent was, but upon multiple attempts, I figured out that you actually need to go to the first floor, or the floor that we're in, and click on the office, which opens our vent system. This night went about as smooth as anything. Keeping track of animatronics was pretty simple, and eventually we would beat the night and move into night 3. Night 3 begins, and now we have 2 more animatronics to get rid of. The first one being Mr. Krabs, and the other one being Sandy. Mr. Krabs is pretty much Foxy from FNAF 2. He will move from the first floor and eventually get toward your office, and he will remain right outside directly in front of your view. And if you see Mr. Krabs, you need to hold the flashlight until he goes away. And with Sandy, I'm gonna be honest, I don't actually know how she works yet fully, but I'm pretty sure if she gets toward the generator, she will pretty much cause a light flicker for a few seconds, so not really much of a threat. This night overall is pretty much learning each of the mechanics, because in the later nights, the whole game ramps up. But this night is a kind of beginner night, and giving us a full look of this game's whole mechanic system. However, if you have multiple animatronics in your game at once, you're pretty much dead, as the override only gives you 3 animatronics to look at once. So if all 4 are in your game, which is pretty rare, but if this does happen, you're gonna die. So let's move into night 4, which again has the same mechanic system. The phone guy again establishes that we are here only to die, but this night houses the most brutal mechanic this game has yet, and that is getting the game to crash. This night, for some reason, had me going multiple attempts with the game crashing just randomly. I had around 4 attempts and each attempt resulted in a crash, so I was pretty upset. But you know how it goes, you know, turn off the game if you're frustrated, come back a few hours later, and what do you know, the game stopped crashing. I don't know what this was, but honestly it doesn't really matter because night 4 would eventually be beaten and we moved into night 5. Night 5 was essentially night 4 in that the animatronics worked the same and it was just a little bit more difficult. The main takeaways were that we were getting closer to figuring out what's going on in the pizzeria or Chum bucket, and yeah, that's about it for this night. Pretty simple. Night 6 is the last night of the game, and this night we begin immediately with the phone guy telling us that we are kind of expecting someone to save us, but that won't work, so kind of foreshadowing events later on. But nonetheless, night 6 was pretty easy. I first tried it, so yeah. We eventually beat night 6, and it turned the game into a cutscene, where us, the main character, is kind of saying, oh, I'm gonna leave now. So we go to the front of the Chum bucket and we are met with a unknown person who's just saying, oh, you know, just break the door, you know, just get out. We stand there undecisive, and looking behind us, we get to see every animatronic staring us down. And we then get jump scared by Squidward. A pretty swift ending to a overall pretty nice FNAF game. The game has a custom night with a max difficulty, but I'm not beating it because I don't really want to. Sorry guys. The last game for today's video is called Bubba's Diner. This game is, well, we're gonna get into it. So to start off this game, we begin our journey inside Bubba's Diner. We are in the main room, and to our left and to our right are other rooms we can go to. To our left, we have the security room, which is the first room we need to go to. The person on the intercom tells us we need to go into this room and check up on the animatronics. During this time, we're also going to need to print some papers for some unknown reason. But this is where things start to get a little bit different. The game itself is really buggy. This first section is pretty basic. There are animatronics on the cameras, and our goal is to make them not get to our room. For the 3 cameras we can see, we have an audio on each camera. If we press the audio, they get lured toward where the audio came from. We already need to know how the pizzeria looks, as this doesn't really give you a kind of map. You just kind of have to figure out where the office is as opposed to everything else. But I guess it's not that hard, because the main issue with this night is, well, nothing. It's actually really easy, like stupidly easy. If we continue to just press the audio on the main kitchen area or the dining room, the animatronics will always stay in that area. So the only thing left to do is print out all the files. I did die on my first attempt, but I was just a noob, so I was getting used to the game's mechanics. But after this jump scare, I pretty much got the rhythm of the whole game, and well, this night went by extremely quickly. With this section done, we can go back to the main area of the diner and we can leave, and this concludes our first night. We get a little TV section, kind of like Sister Location, how this game portrays these post-night sections. With that, we would move into night 2, and the first thing we need to do is the same thing as night 1. Yep, you heard me right, we need to do night 1's thing again for no reason whatsoever. But as I said before, it wasn't that hard, so we got through this pretty quickly. But then we would have to do the most ultimately humiliating action ever seen in a FNAF game. We made our way toward the bathroom. Already things are getting a little bit weird, but they're gonna get weirder, I could tell you that much. We need to go to the bathroom and plunge the toilet. And this section is filled with epic music. I'm not gonna play it because it might be copyright, but you can imagine how humiliating this was. There's no active threats during this night beside the animatronic behind you, but the thing is, interestingly, if you stare straight and never look back, the animatronic that's behind you can't move. He will stay at the exact same spot the whole night. So by spamming the left mouse button on the toilet, eventually I would beat this night, and what do you know, there was a kid's toy stuck in the toilet. And with that, we would return home, where we go onto our computer and for some reason are looking at the company's transaction record. The game is set somewhere in between the 80s and the 90s, I'm not too sure, but the actual revenue of this place is 8,000, and 8,000 back in 1980 is worth a lot more than what it is now. $8,000 back in 1980 was worth $30,000, and you're telling me this whole diner became bankrupt? That is the most absurd thing I've ever heard in a FNAF game. So moving on to night 3, we have to do some new innovative task, and that is do the exact same thing as night 2. I was humiliated yet again by plunging this out of the toilet, but we got to the next section of the night and we actually have a new task to complete. So by going to party room 2 and by entering the room, we are faced with a new animatronic, being Mr. Giggles. Mr. Giggles is a pretty weird animatronic. He is a lot like Funtime Freddy in design, but kind of a bunny version of him. We have 2 minutes to complete this task. We have a checklist with a bunch of different prompts, and we need to give Mr. Giggles all of these sentences. During each sentence, he will respond to us, and we can continue on to the next prompt, yada yada yada, you get the drill. The thing is with Mr. Giggles is he is very unpredictable, and what I mean by this is he will jump scare you for literally no reason. What I found is the way to find if Mr. Giggles is getting more aggressive is his head movements, kind of acting like FNAF 6's salvage sections. So if Mr. Giggles goes into this leaning type of position, he is at his most aggressive. As he gets into his other like stages, we can then use the prompts, and that is how we know it is safe to use them. But if Mr. Giggles stays in this position, then we need to wait until he obviously goes more further back. If you do this for all the prompts, you actually complete the section. This did take me a while to figure out, but eventually I got through the section, and I have to admit, I didn't really enjoy it, but well, we completed it. So by leaving the pizzeria, we got home, and now we have a tape to listen to. On the tape, we hear what seems to be an employee working at Bubba's diner, and they seem to be bored. That's it. That's what this tape pretty much tells us. So moving on to night 4. Don't worry, we don't have to do the exact same tasks. The following task we need to do is we need to go back to the toilet and clean the thing again. For some reason, this pops up 3 times throughout the whole game, so I think the creators really wanted us to clean the toilet for some unknown reason. But moving on, we got to another party room, and in this room, we need to sweep the floor. As we are sweeping the floor, occasionally an animatronic can be seen in the Pirate Cove. And if we see the animatronic, we need to just simply flash it with our flashlight and continue sweeping the floor in front of us. This section is really easy, and eventually I would complete it and move into our last task. We now need to go to the basement. And here we have the last animatronic in the game. And this animatronic is Bubtrap. The name is pretty unique, I can't lie. So with this section, there's 4 different areas, and if you see Bubtrap, you need to use your flashlight again. I mean, pretty simple. And if you do this, he goes away, and you have to repeat this for the remainder of the section. It's a survival section, and it's honestly the best part of the whole game. We also have a flashlight meter, so if we obviously use too much, then well, we have no flashlight. Eventually I would beat this section, and this would lead us to the last kind of like post-night section. There's been a dead body found inside of Bubba's diner. Just some lore about the game, you know, pretty much saying that Bubtrap is possessed by an actual ghost. Honestly, some pretty spooky shit, but anyways, night 5, again, we need to sweep the floor, you know, beat this section, move on to the basement, and this is where things get absolutely insane. Bubtrap decides to attack us, and during this section, we need to grab a shotgun and shoot him with a shotgun. So by shooting Bubtrap with the shotgun, we end the game. This then leads to the final cutscene, where we see a board with a bunch of clues, I guess, kind of piecing things together. Essentially, you wouldn't have never guessed, but there's someone who does stuff, and then it's the purple guy. It's the same thing. But anyways, with that, we completed the game, and we got to the extras menu, where we can actually see all the animatronics in all their glory. And there's also a bunch of deleted content, which, I mean, this game originally was meant to be placed in a bunker. So a bunker to a diner, pretty massive difference. I can see how this game had to be rebuilt from scratch, but anyways, enough of that. That concludes our final FNAF game for this video. If you never want to miss out on a future upload, then please consider subscribing. It will help out a lot. On screen here is a video where I play Roblox, so click that if you want to see that. But anyways, until next time, take it easy and goodbye.